What's going on, guys? Today I want to show you how to get razor sharp chisels in the field using nothing more than a piece of 150 grit sandpaper, a 2x4, and some black stuff. So stay tuned. Okay guys, so as I just mentioned, here are the things you're going to need. This is 150 grit sandpaper. This isn't even the wet dry stuff, just regular old sandpaper. You're going to need a piece of wood. This is a 2x4 that's been ripped down. It doesn't have to be ripped down. It can be pretty much any piece of wood. And the black stuff, this is actually buffing compound. You can get this at Home Depot. That's where I got this piece. If you don't have this at your local Home Depot, I'll put a link in the description where you can buy this. One other thing you're going to need is a flat surface. This is a piece of sanded plywood. It doesn't have to be a piece of sanded plywood. You could honestly even use the top of a 2x4 as long as the surface is relatively flat. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do is clamp my sandpaper in place. If you don't have a clamp, you can use tape or just set something heavy on it. So I like to start sharpening on the back of the chisel first. This is your constant. This doesn't change. This needs to be as flat as possible, and that's where I'm going to start. A lot of times I found if I start on the front bevel, this face here, I'll sharpen that until I get a nice square edge all the way across. You can check this with a square, and then what happens is when I flip the chisel over and start to flatten the back side, my front bevel ends up no longer being square. And then I have to go back and resharpen this front bevel again anyway. So I might as well start on the back, get this nice and flat first, then go back and square everything up using this front bevel. If you can see our scratch pattern, how we've got scratches going lengthwise along the chisel, those are the scratches that we just made on the sandpaper. We also have some scratches that are going kind of diagonally. Those are the old scratches that we want to remove. We want to flatten the back of this chisel, or we want to work this chisel on the sandpaper until all of these scratches are going in the same direction. That way we know the back of this chisel is 100% flat. Okay, so we've been working on this for about 5 minutes, and you can see all of our scratches are now in the same direction. And you can even see our temper line here. So now what we're going to do is, I don't know if you can see where our apex is, how kind of uneven and nasty that looks. We're going to want to square that with the rest of our chisel. So now we're just going to work this edge on the sandpaper until everything is completely square. And hopefully you can see this, but we are pretty much exactly square. So now what we're going to do is work on this front bevel, and we're just going to work this on the paper. We're just going to find our angle. We're going to do that by simply placing our chisel right on the sandpaper and kind of feel where that angle sits, and that's our angle. Now we're just going to work this on the sandpaper as consistently as possible. I find that it's best for me if I only work in one direction, and I maintain an angle best going forward into the papers. You may maintain an angle best going backwards, but I'm just going to work this in the forward direction because that's the direction that I maintain my angle the best at. So we find our angle. We're going to want to check this often, make sure that we're not way off of our angle, and it's looking like we're okay. So we're working this flat spot, the spot that we just created, in order to get this nice and square. We can still see a flat spot on there, and we're just going to keep working this until that flat spot disappears and we've completely apexed at that point. One thing that I like to do is check the square every once in a while and make sure we're not getting too far off, especially with wider chisels. You can vary the amount of pressure that you put on one side of the chisel or the other to help you re-square an edge. And it looks like that I would probably apply a little bit more pressure to this side as I'm working it. So now we are at a point where we have formed a burr along the apex of the edge, so that burr is essentially folded over itself, and I can feel that by running my finger up this side. Now what we need to do is remove that burr, and the best way that I found to do it is with buffing compound. This is black. This is usually the coarsest or most aggressive compound that you can buy. This is Ryobi brand. This works great on leather. If you don't have leather handy, something else that works is simply rubbing it into a piece of wood. So now we're just going to work our chisel on this piece of wood as if it was a strop, And again, I like to start with the back side first and then move my way to the front side. Now, this doesn't work, going like this because our handle gets in the way, so you have to kind of hold the chisel at an angle like so and keep it as flat as you can and just move the chisel backwards along the strop or the piece of wood. Don't underestimate the power or the cutting power of this buffing compound. I don't know if you can see how it's actually putting scratch patterns into the back of our chisel. Remember, all of our scratch pattern was going in the lengthwise direction, and simply stropping it at an angle is putting a new scratch pattern in this chisel. It's kind of amazing how well this stuff cuts. Now we can simply go to the other side and strop the other side. Again, we're going to strop the other side by simply lining up our sharpening angle, or the same angle that we used for sharpening. I don't put a ton of pressure on here, but I do put a little bit of pressure, and we're just going to strop at that same angle. When you're stropping on wood like this, you can use a little bit more pressure than you would if you were stropping on leather, mainly because the wood doesn't wrap around and over the edge, and it won't round off your edges easily. Now, a chisel that's been properly maintained won't need to go through this whole process every single time. A chisel that's been maintained, you can a lot of times skip the sandpaper process completely and go right to using compound on a piece of wood or compound on a piece of leather, or some other way of carrying the compound. You can't just drop on the compound. You need something that will carry the compound and hold it in place. Okay, so this is what our edge is looking like after a quick stropping on our 2x4. It's not a super refined edge, but it is stupid sharp. Let me show you. So we're not even really touching the skin, and the hairs are just kind of jumping away. It's probably not going to show up on camera, but that's basically what it's doing. We'll do the old fishing line test. Whittle a piece of fishing line. And how does it cut wood? Alright guys, so that is how I sharpen my chisels when I'm out in the field and I don't have access to my giant whetstones. I actually flattened these the other day because I was going to do a chisel sharpening video, basically this one, but I ended up thinking about it and realizing that I've never been in a situation where I've needed to sharpen my chisel and had access to my whetstones. I've always been out in the field and didn't have access to anything. So basically sandpaper, 150 grit, nothing special. This is just regular sandpaper. This isn't even the wet or dry stuff. And the reason I think this works so well is that this grit on here doesn't stay 150 grit forever. It breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. I don't know what the ending grit would be, probably like 300. I honestly don't even know, but the grit breaks down on this sandpaper and it gives you a finer and finer grit. And it really does give you good results. Stropping on a piece of wood with compound, buffing compound, it works just fine. Basically, all you're looking for is something to carry the compound. You can't strop on just a plain block of compound. This doesn't work. you need something to hold that compound in place and keep it from moving. Piece of wood works fine, piece of sanded plywood works fine, leather works the best, at least in my experience. So if you're looking for a way to sharpen your chisels in the field, sandpaper, piece of 2x4, you can even make yourself a DIY strop like this. This is just a belt, piece of leather belt glued to a piece of 1x3 with compound. It's that simple. I have a video on how I made this. I'll link it in the description or at the end of this video, one or the two. So that's how I sharpen my chisels in the field. Hopefully this video helps. Don't forget to like the video, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.